Hi, everybody. It's Kevin and it's Donna, and welcome to an exciting episode of the Med List. Today, we've got another really good one, Donna. I think that this one for both you and I, we've been looking forward to it for a while, even after the show or before the show, and I'm sure after the show. Lots of conversations around how impactful this subject really is for our
Yeah.
audiences and audiences across the entire United States, because it is so tough to find care for your loved ones. And oftentimes that ends up falling on only some shoulders of individuals that already have a full-time job. They've got a family, they've got other responsibilities. And it is not only a lot of weight on those individuals, but the healthcare system in general to be able to understand, how do we work with these folks? How do we become better at bringing in these working caregivers into the fray so everybody can benefit from that home health model we keep pushing? Donna,
Yeah.
any thoughts before we get rolling on this episode?
I just think it's really important that that people know that the four of us who are going to be on this show, we've all experienced being working caregivers. And I think that that's important, that people understand that we have this empathy. We're together in this. And I just want to share that because as we go through, we're going to hit a lot of points that are going to be like, oh yeah, I've done that. I've experienced that. So I just can't wait to get started, Kevin.
Amazing. Get ready for a personalized episode. We'll talk to you guys in a sec. All right, Donna. Stuff that's fun and exciting in the world of the Northwest. Well, we went on a little quick vacation for the family over to Lake Chelan. It was quite cold over there, but we had all the nieces and nephews all together in one place. And so that is always so much fun to see the giggles and the laughing and the running in circles and all that good stuff. We did get some family pictures back from it, though, Donna. And I will say, I am due for a haircut. When you're in the swimming pool and you get to see your hair flopped all over, it's time. So I'm hitting the barber here sometime after the show.
That's great.
How about you, Donna?
So
How was your
I
week?
had a staycation and it was awesome because I got to see both my kids in the same place together, chatting, all of us. So it was just so wonderful to spend that time together. So near and dear to my heart. It's a
Oh,
definite bonus.
I love that. And I do get yelled at by my 2-year-old and 4-year-old niece and nephew because I do not wave at them during the show when they're waving back at me. So I love you guys. It's good to see both of you. I love all you family that I get to see on here. I wish I could
Mhm.
sometimes. But without further ado, two people we're really excited to see are Selma
Yes,
and Zach. Let me add them to the stage now.
absolutely. Great. So we are just so excited. I know we said it before and we'll be saying it all throughout, but Selma and Zach, I'm so happy that you are with us. So Selma Archer, she is a labor and employment lawyer whose career has spanned both the public and private sector. Her professional background includes tenure at legal counsel to a New Jersey governor, where she held oversight for the Department of Labor and Department of Human Services. And then this partnering with state commissioners, agencies, constituent groups, helped to develop the initiative statewide programs to improve workplace and human services for disadvantaged communities. Just amazing work that you've done. And in Zach, we have Zack Demopoulos with us today. He has over 37 years of diverse experience working in the corporate and small business environments. He ran a home care agency for 13 years, helping over 500 families care for their family loved ones and hiring over 700 professional caregivers. He actually produced a podcast about raising rents, and that means parents, which I just think that that is such a great title. But so together, Zach and Selma, they've written a book about the working caregiver titled Working Caregivers, The Invisible Employees. I'm just wowed by this book. I read it cover to cover. It hit me hard in some spots. I took notes. I've talked to my HR group. Just, it was so empowering to me. So I am so pleased to hear from you and learn more from you. I just think it's so important that we have this discussion and that more employers and employees have these discussions too. So thank you so much for being with us.
Wow,
I want to have them,
the intro
yeah,
was great, but this is really good. I mean, this is amazing. Your music and stuff was awesome, but this is keep it up. Don't stop. Don't stop. This is awesome.
That makes you get into it, right?
Yes, thank you for that great intro.
Oh, thank you guys for coming. We're excited to have you guys because I think, as Donna was really pointing out, it touches each one of us, right? Very personal feeling to this book that you guys wrote there, and also a very personal feeling to just the conversation we're gonna have today. You know, about why did we get into this individual space? And Donna's holding up the book there. Please, guys, check that out. Great read, great two people you'll get to meet today. And speaking of these great two people, why did it happen, Zach and Selma? How did you guys get together? What does this really come from? And all of us have experienced, or we will experience, having to take care of loved ones as they go through different processes in their life, experience different disease manifestations, and have to figure out how to put these puzzle pieces together that we don't even know where they're sitting in the first place. But how did you two get those puzzle pieces to click?
Well, should I start, Zach?
I always say legal always goes before HR.
Well, I'll just give you a little background of how we came to have this book. Zach and I used to work together many years ago. I think we met, it was 1999. And we were working for the same company, and we ended up in the same workspace at some point and got to be good friends. And the company that we worked for was purchased by another company, and we lost track of each other. And some 10 or 12 years later, we found ourselves in the same workspace again. And so we were catching up with each other about, what had transpired over that time frame. And turns out we both basically had experienced this whole caregiver journey thing that I didn't know. He was working caregiver. He had no idea I was going through the same journey. And we started talking about the challenges of trying to take care of a loved one while you're working, full time and have responsibilities to your family to either be that primary care individual or helping the other siblings out and just trying to juggle that whole process of trying to please both sides of the coin. And it's
Right.
a very, as you both know, it's a very difficult juggling act. And so we said, as leaders in our companies, what can we do to help others not to have to go through this type of struggle? Like, how can we make the employment environment easier and facilitate change so that we could help people along the way, not only just the working caregiver themselves, but also the company? How can we help to better the work environment? And we came up with this idea for the book, and here we are. And we're both very excited about having this opportunity for change.
Wow.
And I got to say, Donna, when you said, I don't know if you heard my heart hit the desk, but when you said you showed you read your book and you start talking to HR, that's the reason primarily why we wrote this book. We want someone to read it and be inspired to do something about it. And you just nailed it for us. We're done. That was great.
Yeah.
That was beautiful. And we call it invisible employees because, as you heard Selma's story, we both didn't even know we're working caregivers. Nobody realizes it. You don't really you don't raise your hand and say, I'm a caregiver. No, it's easy to raise your hand and say, I'm over the age of this, or I'm this gender, but nobody really raises their hand and says they're a caregiver. And when the two of us came through with this revelation, it hit us upside the head like, wow, I think we really need to talk more about this to help people not go through what we're talking about. So that's it's a great story, and I love it. I'm just blessed with Selma and I to work together, and hopefully we can move the needle just a little bit so that people like Donna and you, Kevin, can share more about this with others and help maybe help employers kind of open their eyes a little bit more and say, hey, you know what? We can help our employees. We really can.
Tell us this, Zach, and go ahead, Donna, please.
I just wanted to comment on, we're talking a little bit, and I know you guys have some great statistics in your book too, but there was one day I was at work and there was 4 of us in this particular office suite, and we're talking, and we each had stories that were significant at that time of caring for an older person in our families, whether it was in our own parents or an in-law. And it spanned everywhere from hospitalization, somebody at home, to somebody trying to get into long-term care. It was apparent that every single one of us had something very significant going on while we're all at work. And I'm thinking of your statistics going, well, it's way more than what they're even putting down. Because here we are, like just the four of us who were in this suite, we were all having issues at that time. So I don't know if you want to comment at all on any of the statistics that you've been able to unearth here.
Selma will share the numbers. She's a numbers lady, but I want to say one thing. I wish that was a fishbowl so we could watch that conversation and go around and share it with the world, because that's what needs to be happening. That you found one or two other people to have something in common, and you felt comfortable to talk about it, without a doubt.
Yeah. So just to follow up, Donna, with what you just said, one of the biggest aha moments for me when I was doing this, Zach and I were working on the book and we were doing this research, was I always thought that the majority of long-term care in this country came from institutions, facilities, nursing home facilities, and so forth. And when I was doing the research, that is not the case. The long-term care that is done in this country, the bulk of it is done by untrained, unpaid family members and friends of the individual who needs the assistance. So that was my first aha moment. And then in terms of some of the additional data that is really compelling, 73% of employees in businesses in the US have some type of caregiver responsibility from a day-to-day basis. There are 38 million working caregivers in the US workforce. So when you take those large numbers and you think about the word invisible, it's like, how is that possible? How is it that all of these people are going, around daily with no one realizing what they're going through on a daily basis? And that's because we have not experienced, at least when Zach and I were going through this, we didn't feel comfortable coming forward saying that this is what we're experiencing, because we didn't feel that the environment was going to support us that way, in terms of, are we going to be viewed as uncommitted to our work? Are we going to be, unreliable? Are we going to miss a promotion? All of these things coming. Or are we going to get terminated because they feel like we're not going to be focused on our work? So all of these things came into play when we were doing this, and probably still does. And you just don't talk about it. So it actually is good to hear that you are able to sit with a group of people at work and exchange these stories. That's a good,
without a doubt. And I want to put in perspective, 38 million that Selma just said, that's the state of California. That's how many people live in the state of California. 38 million people are working and caring for an older adult. And by the way, you can't pick them out of an audience. They're all shapes and sizes, ages. Everyone thinks it's the old traditional 40 to 55-year-old woman who's, leaving work and taking care of somebody. That is not the case. We have a lot of millennials. We have Gen X. We have all types of ethnicities. You cannot particularly pick somebody out of the audience. It's everybody. And as the great, rest in peace, Rosalind Carter always said, there are 4 types of people in this world. Only 4. 1 is a person who receives care or has received it. 2, a person who is given care. 3, somebody who was that caregiver. Wait, did I get that right, Selma? And 4th, you're going to be a caregiver. It's one of those 4. I think I messed it up. But anyway, you're going to be. And what we hope in our storytelling, and what you did, Donna, in your workroom, we're hoping that storytelling is going to be the thrust, that as people tell more stories, then people will be more comfortable to talk about it.
Let's hear a little bit about that story, Zach and Selma. I think a lot of folks that are listening are probably thinking, I thought I was just a son or a daughter, or, whatever I am in society, as you mentioned previously, like that is just my role. Like that's what I'm supposed to do in life, is take care of my loved ones. And you guys have kind of highlighted something that is interesting from an HR legal perspective, which I love, that these individuals have additional pressure on their plates, additional responsibilities that make working and all these other balances difficult. When you guys got together with your specific stories, tell us When did you realize the difference from I'm not just a son, I'm not just a daughter trying to help a loved one. I'm actually somebody that is in the working world struggling with my career balance.
Yeah, Kevin, it's a great question because, like I said, most people don't think of it that way. Most people don't want to. I'm a child. This is what I'm supposed to be doing, right? Or I'm a spouse, or I'm a sibling. I was drafted into a caregiver. I had the biggest job I've ever had in my career. I was the CFO's HR person for Pfizer, and you couldn't get a bigger job than that, right? And I'm thinking, I'm living large, and my world went upside down in a 3-minute phone call. My brother called me from North Carolina. I'm in New York City. And he tells me my dad, who's never been ill his entire life, at 78 years old, has a major stroke. And he is crying on the phone, which I've never seen my brother cry before. And he's like, we don't know what to do. No one's prepared for this. No one's planned for this. And I literally did not feel comfortable telling my new boss that I got to go to North Carolina for something personal. I worked it into my schedule. I got on a plane, went down there 6 times in 2 months to spend time with my dad, with all the physicians, with all the transition of care to the facilities. And it just was stressing me both physically, mentally, and it started eating away at me financially, right?
Yeah.
But the whole time, Kevin, to your question, I'm thinking this is my duty as a son. But here's the thing. My mother, who took care of my father after my father passed away, became of need to live independently. And I had a whole different viewpoint then. Then I started thinking, wait a minute, I actually need to think more like a caregiver. I need to be thinking, who else can I tap into? My 3 Ps. What is my plan here? Who are the people I need to be tapping into? What are the provisions like finance and resources that I need to play with? Because I cannot do this again alone. It's impossible.
Yeah.
Wow, so true.
And you really,
Selma, tell your story. You actually left work. You left your career.
I did. And my story was a bit different from Zach. He had no notice. He was, drafted, as he said. I, on the other hand, was dealing with a mother who had dementia. She had several other illnesses, diabetes, congestive heart failure, so many other things, Alzheimer's, not Alzheimer's, the one that shakes. Parkinson's. And she just started continually. It's like every year she developed a new diagnosis. But all that time I was back and forth, flying back and forth from where I lived to stay with her, blocks of time, 2 weeks here, 3 weeks there, a month here, a month there. And I would have thought that when it came to all the things that go into caregiving, I would have been prepared. That wasn't the case. Even though it took place over a long period of time, 10 or more years, I can't say that I was ever prepared for it. Unlike someone who was drafted, I was still just as unprepared as a person who just found out that day, as opposed to me going all this period of time. Number one, there's a very emotional component, as you know, to caregiving. And it's very difficult to watch a person just continually get worse and worse each and every day that you're with them, and that they may recognize you one day, the next day they don't. That's a very, very tough emotional process to deal with. As well as there's no book that you can go to that says how to be the best caregiver ever. There's just no book that's going to guide you through that. And that also is one of the things that Zach and I are hoping that we can offer, through our work, is hope, support where there may not have been support, and also education, just helping people to understand what is needed in the work environment for people who are in this situation to be successful, because it doesn't have to be an either or. Like I left, as Zach said, I left my job because I didn't feel like I actually just could not do both things. I couldn't be the best caregiver for my mom and the best employee for work. And interestingly, when people are in the situation that I was in, having to choose between continuing to work or taking off and caring for that family member, people make the choice for family. That's what the data says. They choose family. So as a result, you're losing a great employee. And that ends up, impacting the company financially.
Yeah. And I want to share, Donna and Kevin, that we have to be careful, Selma and I, with your listeners, that we're not saying you're not a son or daughter. You're a caregiver and you need to think like a caregiver. That's actually not going to be very helpful whatsoever. What we are trying to make sure when we speak and communicate, that we're saying you are definitely a daughter, a son, a spouse, a sibling, but you have caregiver responsibilities that can be easier. And so that you can find some of the things that Selma's referring to, some meaning in the caregiver role and some quality of life. That's what we really hope, that a caregiver don't go through what we went through. I mean, I struggled terribly with my father. I just wish I would have went and got help. I was an HR guy and I didn't know what to do. And somebody told me, call EAP. I'm like, EAP? That's just a resource I give out to recruits to tell them that we have it. I have no idea what that even does. I called them and they gave me a list of home care agencies. That's all they did. I called the first one, gave them 2 weeks non-refundable credit card. And my mother, who's a Greek immigrant, didn't want anybody coming to her house to begin with, but she fired them on the second day. And so I was back to square one. I mean, I didn't know what to do. I was pulling out my hair. And so it created tension with my siblings. It created tension with my own family. I mean, Kevin, you're talking about the nephew, nieces at 2 and 4. I mean, I have grandchildren at 2 and 4. And, I want to be with them all the time, but I go down to Charlotte, North Carolina, almost every 30 to 45 days to be with my mother for 4 to 5 days because no other sibling can do it. And I'm okay with that, but you do sacrifice with some of the other things. You just make up for it when you get back. And I wanted to wave to your 4 and 2-year-old.
Oakley and Beckett, that's for you right there, guys. So I was going to ask you on that one, Zach, you did say the differentiation between the two, just so our audience kind of understands historically what's happened to the caregiving role. We went from having a caregiving responsibility that was oftentimes months, like a month's period of time, that we had a dying process, someone passed away. If we're looking back 50 years, now we've got a caregiving process with usually 2 people in the household, mother and father, husband and wife, that are both working full time. We no longer have the stay-at-home mom component as often in society. And 2, the disease states and complexity of caregivers that they have to deal with is substantially higher. As Selma is really kind of highlighting there, dealing with all the things Selma was talking about as a trained clinician that has gone through schooling to be able to take care of those individuals the best to our abilities, that is very difficult. It is a tall task, let alone an individual that is trying to balance a full-time working schedule, their own families, and be able to take care of mom. And so I think there's something to be able to highlight that for those folks that feel like, well, my aunt and uncle were able to do it, or grandma and grandpa were able to do it for previous generations. It is a whole different beast, as we may call it, to be able to do it today. So it's another level of burden. But Donna, off to you.
Yeah. So, and I wanted to piggyback on that actually, Kevin, in regards to thinking about the complexities of who we're caring for. I hear things that, long-term care is actually, hospitalized kind of ish patients from, years ago. And that assisted living is actually long-term care from years ago. Like we are seeing this shift. So there are definitely more complexities in what people are having to do for folks at home, for those that they're caring for. But of course, we talk about the med list, and I want to talk about the meds because it's such an important part of caring for someone. I think if somebody is home and you need to care for someone, there are probably medications associated with that care. And whether someone has, all of a sudden had a heart attack, stroke, or something very acute, and life has changed dramatically for that person, or like Selma, you said, where, there's something more gradual over time. And it always seems to be like more meds are being added. So right now I'm like, oh my gosh, they have to get my book, the Med Strong, because once we stay on meds for so long, we end up over medicating. And then there's more issues because the body has changed. And then, it's a new issue. Let's add on more meds when really we should be re-looking at meds. But I would love to know, and I know you have some thoughts on, how medications play a role, medication management, any words of wisdom you have for our listeners. We would just love to hear some of those ideas and stats.
Well, here's a stark fact, and I'm brown nosing my hosts because I did a little homework, and I looked up the Mayo, so credible source. I looked up Mayo Clinic's data, and they shared that in America, 1 out of every 3 Americans 65 and older are taking 5 or more medications. You ready for this? And we are all living longer. Kevin, you hit it on the money, buddy. We're all living longer. We're all having more diseases, more issues. On the average, 75-year-olds in this country are taking up to 10 medications.
Yeah. Wow.
I know people can't handle one. Remember, one who's healthy and lucid. Can you imagine somebody who might be having some forgetfulness, or someone who decides, I don't want to take my pills? I mean, Selma and I talk about this all the time, how tough it is to take to make someone take pills. But I will tell you that it's a huge issue. I'll let Selma touch on this, but from my home care business, I used to just feel sorry for families because they would get sticker shocked. They would say, okay, I would send mom and dad to an assisted living at $6,000 a month. We're good. But, oh, wait a minute. Those darn people, they're tagging on to do medication filling pill boxes because I can't get there from work, or because I live an hour away, or I have my own kids to worry about. And one side of me says, but someone has to do it. Not, you need a technician to do that and do it right and make sure they're taking it. But on the other hand, yeah, that stinks. You're not paying $50 a day extra to do medication. Or they would hire me to send a nurse to the house because they can't do it, which is $50 for the 30 minutes. And it used to make me sad. But on the other hand, I've seen the benefits of compliance, especially when it comes around dehydration and UTIs and preventative and coming off from a hospital stay, coming home, and how important it was. I see all the benefits, but it is a huge task, as you both hosts know, and you talk about it in all your podcasts, a huge task to stay on top of this, filling medications, making sure they're taking them correctly, outdated medications, make sure they're not taking it. I used to go once a week and see all my clients, and almost the first thing I would do is I'd open up the fridge to see if there was food in there to make sure my aides were doing a good job, and talk about medications. Not that I personally would manage them, but let's make sure that that they were, they're not out of date. Selma, do you want to add something to the medication?
Sure. Yeah. Kevin, what you were talking about earlier, you mentioned how it was caregiving was relatively a brief process. People got sick, you cared for them for a brief time, and they passed away. That's not the case today because of all the advances in medication. The average length of a caregiver journey these days is between 4.5 and 5 years. So, when you start taking care of someone, you're going to be there a couple years. It's not going to be a couple months. So you have to really get that commitment ready and take charge of the situation, because you're going to be doing it for a while. And then there are the group of people that, it's not the majority of them, but there are some in our category that go 10 or more years taking care of an individual. So it's something that you have to really, as Zach is saying, get that plan in place so that you're ready to do that and make that commitment. The other piece of that is, if you're dealing with someone who has dementia, or Alzheimer's, or a chronic illness that's continually progressing, the statistics show us that at least 54% of caregivers who are in that situation are dealing with medication management on a daily basis. And as that disease progresses, that percentage shoots up to 90%. So you got 90% of caregivers doing daily medication management. And you have problems that come up, on a daily basis, because, as Zach mentioned, what if the patient doesn't want to take the medicine? What happens when you change the dosage? The doctor changes the dosage, and now the red pill is now yellow, and you can't get the person to take the yellow pill because they say their pill was red. I used to go through that all the time with my mom, and trying to explain to her, that the dosage, the doctor changed the dosage, and this is the same pill as the red pill, but now it's yellow. And so you're trying to get the person to take the medicine. The clock is ticking. You're going to be late to work. you're getting off schedule with the time frame of taking the next dose of medicine. Now you're behind. So it just throws off the whole process. So these are the things that cause a lot of stress, and a lot of fatigue and a lot of emotional anxiety for caregivers on a daily basis. They're concerned, about that medication management is a huge. And then also, if you're not just dealing with pills, you have to give injections. You have to change catheter. You have to monitor catheters. You have to crush pills, or you have to, because they can't swallow a whole pill, or you have to cut a pill in half. Things like that. It's like, and you have to decide that. The doctor may have the individual on a sliding scale, meaning depending on the reading of their blood pressure or the reading of their glucose level, then you have to change the dosage. So you're deciding that. It's a lot of stress associated with that. The interesting part, and I just want to make sure I say this, or it's more than interesting, actually, it's really why we can call this a crisis, is because every day in this country, 10,000 people turn the age 65. And the U.S. Census Bureau is predicting that in just 6 years, by 2030, there'll be people that are 65 and over. There'll be more people 65 and over in this country than there are people 18 and under. And the unfortunate part of that is we're going to need more caregivers. And where are they going to come from? Because professionally, the professional pool of caregivers is continuously shrinking, where the need for caregiving is continually on the rise. So you got this conflict with supply and demand.
Mm-hmm.
And we're hoping that our book will raise awareness of this conflict and help us to come up with some solutions out there to help address this in the future.
Yeah, for sure.
And we were really excited about being here with you guys because medication plays a big role for the working caregiver. And I'll tell you how. And I'll do a plug. I'll do a plug for your book and your workbook, Donna. So if I would have read this a while back, I would probably have saved my mother a hospitalization or two. And yes, that's important for mom. But the time it took me for those 2 hospitalizations away from work, expenses, worry, mental distress, emotional distress, could have all been prevented in many cases. And you two preach this the most than anybody, that sometimes there's a lot of over medication. If you think about it, my mother has 5 different doctors. They don't talk to each other. And I'm supposed to be carrying a list of medications with me every time we go to the doctors to make sure, hey, do you know that this is this and this? And my mother now, even in a nursing home, will call me and say, you know what? I'm having anxiety at night. I think they need to increase my pill. You know what it takes for me? How many phone calls I have to make and people I have to talk to? Even if you're local, I'm a long distance caregiver, but if you're local, do you know how much that takes time away from me to get that nailed down? And even when I'm not on the phone, I'm worrying about it. I could be on a meeting with Selma and we're talking, and I just got off the phone with my mother, and it's in my head. And by the way, they call that presentism in this country, and that's a huge problem for corporate America, because people could be in meetings, eyes open and nodding, and they're worrying about, did I make that doctor appointment for my dad? Or I got to get home to fill my mother's pill box. I got kids at soccer. I got forget about dinner. I got, so this is a huge issue with working caregivers that we can prevent, we believe. So I really appreciate the time that you guys and interest that you put on this. I really do.
But please help us with this part, Zach and Selma, and I think it'll help the audience. How are we cobbling it together today? Like, what are the different strategies you're seeing people try to cobble together all those balance points you mentioned, Zach? What are the resources that folks are usually going to? And what are you seeing as some attractive models overall? For me, being up in Washington State, the Family Medical Leave Act was a really interesting move by the state to allow those individuals to get some time to be able to spend with their family members, right? And to avoid the conflicts at work that may come from presentism or just general absence, right? And so I think there's some movement happening there. What are you guys seeing right now when it comes to some successful stories and cobbling? We're not there yet. But what are you guys seeing thus far?
Well, some of the things we're seeing is not everyone is on board with the Medical Leave Act, at the state level. That's going to take some time. But meanwhile, there are a lot of companies out there that are offering one of the things, at least, that people are consistently requesting is flexibility. Flexibility in terms of the hours they work, the location that they can work, being able to work different hours, coming in later, staying later, or coming in earlier, leaving earlier. However, they can, juggle it around so that they can be there for that loved one to do what they need to do and still get their time in, or working remotely. That was one of the big things that came out with COVID. That was one of the big side effects of COVID was that people saw that they were able to get their work done and not necessarily have to be in the office every day. And so we're seeing that model work well with a lot of employers that have not gone back to the office, so to speak. They're allowing employees to continue to work at home, not necessarily every single day, but a large portion of the week they're able to work from home and then come into the office, a couple times a week or 3 times a week. But it's really been helpful to those individuals to have that.
Yeah. So I think I get my stats jumbled up sometimes. So Selma will clean it up for me. But I think over 50% companies are trying to do something about it. But when surveyed, only 25% employees feel that they're actually getting something. So your question, Kevin, is tricky. There are a lot of things that could be done. But an employee has to feel comfortable and supported and understand where they could go. One of the biggest challenges we hear from working caregivers, isn't there just one place I could go? I mean, when it comes to medication, okay, I got one place to go and I can listen to your podcast. But it's not that simple with caregiving. Right before the call, we were talking about Medicaid, a very complex thing to try to grasp and understand. Most people think Medicare does everything. No, I don't need to worry. It does not do anything when it comes to long-term care. So people want one place to go to. And so what I'm hoping and what we're seeing is that employers are needing to look at the life cycle of an employee. They're doing a really good job when someone's having a child. And Selma and I grew up in the 90s in HR and legal. And trust me, we saw it all. I mean, the Family Act just got passed in the late 80s, and people still were abusing it. And there were a lot of negative consequences from it. But we've come a long way. But let's face it, if someone has a child, whether it's a father or mother, they come to work, they're showing pictures, everything's great. No one's coming to work and saying, hey, you want to see my mother's bed ulcer? Your bed sore? Or, hey, my father's in the hospital. Look at this. No one's doing that at all. So people need a place where they could be supported. So caregiver support groups at work or within the company, because it's good to have something in common, something that the millennials were crying about, not crying, that's a bad word, were complaining about early on, is that they'd go to a caregiver support group, but nobody looked like them. So they didn't feel comfortable sharing their story. So how about this novel concept that, to answer your question, a great tool that employers can easily implement and not cost them a dime is start caregiver support groups at work. Carve time away so that they don't have to go do it on their own, an hour during lunch, paid, where maybe a facilitator is hired to come there and have private, confidential caregiver support groups with people that they will feel comfortable with, that we have common ground with. That's an easy thing to do. Employee resource groups. It's getting a lot of negative press out there, but man, I hope they don't go away. Employee resource groups are vital in working caregivers sharing with their employers tools that will help them and support them. Like Selma said, flexibility is great, but management needs to be on board. So there are a lot of great management training tools out there on empathy and listening skills. Leaders don't want to talk about this stuff, and I don't blame them sometimes if you've never experienced caregiving. If you've never experienced it, you don't want to bring it up because how are you going to handle it? But if we teach leaders that it's okay to talk about it or use a story from our book, that's why we wrote our book in a fictional style. It's about Mel and Carrie. There are 2 characters that are fictional, but based on real experiences. And in the book, we walk through their experiences and how they interact with the company. Any leader could pick that book up and say, hey, I want to share a story that I read. Does
Yeah.
anybody else experience that? Can you imagine starting a meeting that way instead of,
Yeah.
all right, who's going to meet the deadline this week, right? And, I mean, show just a little bit of care and sensitivity.
Yeah.
There are a lot of ways you go through benefits too, Kevin and Donna, but that will take money and planning. You need to work on the culture first. So that way, when you do offer a benefit, everyone will embrace it and be on board. I always talk about EAP. No slam against EAP. I think it's a great tool, but it's one of the most overspent, underutilized tools that companies do. Why? You don't communicate about it. You don't talk about it. I mean, I didn't even know what it was, and I was an HR guy for 20 years. So if you're going to do these things, you really need to build a culture where employees will feel comfortable and that they know they can go one place to get all these valuable resources. There are a lot of third-party vendors out there like Wealthy. I really applaud Wealthy by Lindsay Joyner, who started that company. A company could hire them or subsidize some of it so that employees have a 1-800 number basically to call and help me from A to Z, whether it's finding an assisted living place or 55 plus home or downsizing, or how am I going to do this financially, or what legal documents do I need in place? Or can I hire a caregiver? Can you help me with that? They're kind of helping them with all that. That is a great solution, So there are, and by the way, in technology is huge. There are so many ways that you can get apps where families can all be on the same page and learn about roles and responsibilities so they're not bearing it on your own. But let me ask you guys a question. Who's got the time to research and find out the best app out there? And there's so much distrust nowadays online, right? Who has the time to do that? They barely have time for themselves. And do not even bring up the word self-care to caregivers. They loathe that word because they think it's spas or it's weekends away. It's not. Self-care is really taking a few minutes to yourself and revitalize, replenish, regroup, right?
Yeah.
Donna, you were gonna say something?
Yeah, and you're really just preaching what I believe and what I know, because I am a working caregiver too. Like, who has that extra time, like you're saying, to research things? So one of the things that I really struggle with is the stories that I've heard and what I've experienced with applying for Medicaid for parents, for finding out a little bit about VA benefits, for a veteran or spouse of a veteran, and the months that it takes. When I was doing my dad's application for Medicaid, it literally, here was the statistic I got. Oh, yeah, only 8% of people who apply the first time actually get it. And it takes like a lot of times to reapply. I went, excuse me? Like, there's something wrong with the system.
Yeah.
When is it ever that an application, only 8% of people are successful? And my heart just sunk. It took 5 months. And that time was taken away of me being with my dad when I was like, trying to figure out this whole Medicaid puzzle. And then once he got Medicaid, he passed 10 days later. So we spend all this time and energy, right, doing all of this work. So my plea to HRs out there and is to, like you're saying, have that person who can help, who can say, all right, this is what you need. This is what you need to do. This is what you package and support the person instead of giving us another phone number or another something to do, because we can't. We don't have the time to do it. The other thing I want to plug is to employ healthcare, right? Employ pharmacists to do med reviews at your employer, at your
Awesome.
business, right?
Right.
I did this years ago. I started a program called Meds at Work, and it was teaching those that work, how you can manage meds for your entire family. Like me, if my kids were growing up then, I'm taking care of my parents too, the whole sandwich generation, like we're talking about. And how is it that I can manage all of these meds and still get to work, right? So Are people taking their inhalers properly? Are they dosing insulin correctly? Are they taking their meds on time? What makes sense? Is there insomnia? Like whatever's going on, and help people so that they get the coverage that they need and they're taking and optimizing medications. Unfortunately, what I was met with is a lot of companies were going, oh no, our insurance company already does like wellness for our folks.
Oh,
And it's like, it's not the same. It is so not the same. Like, this is meds at work. Like we want meds working for people so people can show up to work and not at a hospital and not
Right.
somewhere else taking care of somebody or getting the call from the nurse at the school or, whatever it is. So I think that there's so many great ideas out there that can happen instead. Here's another list of phone numbers. I was just calling the other day for something. I'm sorry, I'm a little going off a little bit here, but and I was asking for some information for some stuff for my mom. And I literally got a list of numbers. I did go through that list. I did make the phone calls, and I was still in the same spot that I was when I made that original phone call and got that whole list. So, and I feel that, I had the time to make the calls. Lucky me. So I did, but not every caregiver is going to be able to do that list, like you're saying.
So
And
Selma and I feel like Selma said earlier, we want to educate. And Selma and I have a little bit of an advantage. We worked in corporate. We know how they run. And this is no slam against corporations, but let's face it, they get a million vendors knocking on their door every day. All right. Oh, here's another thing. Let me tell you, at Pfizer, a skin screening that they were offering pretty much saved my life. And the reason I'm saying that is because I was educated on how I was 38 years old at the time. And because I didn't know what a skin screening was, I've never been to a dermatologist, no need to. And because the person screened me and I was okay, but educated me, I started going once a year. Well, they found two cancers on my leg and they took them out immediately. If I wasn't going every year, I would have no idea what they'll look like or what was happening. And that's so simple to do. We do need to approach things holistically, organizations. And I said it earlier, life cycle. Don't look just at when you hire someone, look at the benefits they need today. But if you want to retain them, you better look at the benefits they're going to need 5, 10, 20 years from now, right? And your part about the Medicaid and the VA, Donna, so important. Since I sold my business 3 years ago, I've made it as a way to give back. I've spoken to probably 2 to 3 strangers on LinkedIn a week. I give everybody 30 minutes free consultation. And I do my 3 Ps, the people, plan, and provisions. And I always share with everybody, the minute your parent is hospitalized, you have 3 things that you must do immediately. I don't care. Stop everything. And there's 3 things you need to do. Number 1, go ahead and plan their discharge. From the moment they've been admitted, start planning the discharge. People wait till Friday at 5 o'clock to be told by a social worker that your parent's being discharged today. And they're caught with their pants down. Number 2, get where's the legal paperwork? Who's got rights? Who's got the medical proxy, the fiduciary proxy? Who's got all that? Get that set. And then number 3, start Medicaid planning. And people look at me strange, like, oh, I don't think my parents will qualify. You don't understand. It's a huge, long process that you need to start getting educated on it. Bits and pieces, just eat it slowly, right? Like they say, how do you eat an elephant? Little bites at a time. My heart broke when I would pick up a client and they were veterans or veteran spouses, and I would educate them on the VA benefits. There's one that's called aid and attendance that they could actually get their home care paid for, and they would go through the 6-month, 7-month process, and the recipient would eventually pass away and not even benefit from even after the sacrifices they did for our country. It would break my heart. It really would.
Wow. Yeah, I think the topics you guys bring up there when it comes to how does it impact you at home, and Zach, as you mentioned at the end there, how does it impact you before you even get discharged from that first hospitalization? Selma, I've got to turn it over to you on this one here is really from a legal perspective, right? When we're looking to be able to care for our loved ones when they're getting into that point, and I love that Zach bring this up, and I hope that the entire audience understands this. Sometimes we hear support group or resource group and think, oh, good, another place to waste time, right? But I will say this, when it comes to the individual situations that we're going to encounter for every one of our loved ones, they vary so much that sometimes
Yeah.
for, let's say for Zach's loved one, great, a medical assistance program could work great, but for Selma's, it might not. You know, the
Right.
qualifications for Medicaid may work great for Donna's, but not for mine. All of those things help when you go into a resource group or to a support group where you have individuals that have already made those 100 calls that Donna and Zach and Selma have already made, and they can
Yeah.
save you and expedite a ton of time. So please recognize that those have huge benefit inside of them to participate in and to enjoy, you know, that collegial kind of affair. But Selma, when it comes to our legal rights that we currently have and the things that are out there and available for us to be able to take advantage of, what do we have? Like when it comes to all of a sudden you have a family member, as Zach kind of described, goes into the hospital and you know that this is going to be a long process for recovery. Here's the next steps that are going to happen. Well, other than the three that Zach mentioned, what would you add on to that for folks to think about now rather than later for the planning phase?
Well, I think one of the big areas, and specifically in a situation like I was in, where you have someone who's dealing with a dementia or Alzheimer's, and their ability to reason for themselves and to understand what's going on is continually on the decline. You need to start working with that individual immediately upon the diagnosis, while maybe they still have, some cognitive abilities to help with the decision making, because maybe they don't want to go to a nursing home. That's not where they want to be. My mother, for example, did not want to pass away in a nursing home. She wanted to be in her own home, and as long as she could have the ability to speak and say that, she told us that every day. Don't send me to a nursing home. Please don't put me in a nursing home. Which is why we all chipped in and everybody took turns and did what we had to do to be there for her, to give her that wish of being home. And that's just what she wanted. So one of the things I think we should keep in mind from a legal perspective is patient rights. The patient has a right not to go to the hospital. They have a right to, if they want to not go to a nursing home, they don't have to do that, but they have to have a backup plan, because just because they want that doesn't mean they're able to do that. You as a family have to come together and see what you're able to afford and what you're able to do for that individual. Maybe all of you together could come up with, some professional, people to come in, routinely through. We came up with individual that came in 3 times a week. So that helped to free us up. And that individual did mostly a lot of the house cleaning and would help do the meals. And so that freed us up to spend more time with our mom and take care of the medication management and so forth. A nurse came in once a week. I think people need to look at what is included in their insurances, as well as what's out there that's available to them on the Medicare, Medicaid, because some people just don't know that there are things that are available already for them to take advantage of.
Yeah.
So it's not all in one situation. You do have to, kind of peel away the onion a little bit, and nobody's going to come up to you and hand you everything you need. Unfortunately, I wish that was the case, but that's not going to happen. And just to piggyback on what you all have said regarding what can happen and what can help with this situation that's not expensive, keep in mind that the cost to employers of not having some type of support in place for working caregivers is $35 billion to their bottom line. This is in terms of absenteeism. I have a list somewhere. Absenteeism, $25.2 billion a year. Replacement costs to employees who decide they can't do this anymore. They have to go and care full time, $6.6 billion a year. And some of the things that we've mentioned are very inexpensive. And I loved your idea, Donna, about the education of the medication management. That's awesome, and probably very inexpensive to pull off. So there's some things that can be done, and it would be a win-win to both the working caregiver as well as the employer.
And I want to add, Kevin, because that's a great question from the HR corporate world. You do need to be careful how you ask if you do surveys or how you do have those conversations, because you don't want to ask questions that are going to be personal.
True.
Because people do have legal rights, right? They don't have to disclose anything. So it's a fine balance between don't pry into someone's personal life versus create an environment where someone's willing to share. Because if somebody does share, I think the latest stat is, again, Selma, do my stat check for me, but two out of every 10 working caregivers are leaving the workforce. That's 20%. And that's high turnover, high costs. But what a shame that would be. Maybe if that person did share that they were a caregiver, they could find out what their legal rights are. Family leave, okay, is a federal law, but each state has different laws. And I was on the phone with an HR leader from your state, Seattle, Kevin, and she was brilliant. She said her company did due diligence. They looked at all 50 states to find out what was the best leave policy they had, paid leave policy, and they incorporated that for the entire country. And I thought that was brilliant and beautiful. And that way people know their rights. They know they're not going to be discriminated against or hurt in a negative way, because there could be some negative impact. Even if you do offer a leave, the manager might like, oh yeah, right. Why are they gone? And they're going to start prying, which, you know, it used to baffle me when I was an HR person and sales managers, their people would go out on sick leave or maternity leave. And I would ask, well, how are they doing? They're like, well, I don't know. I haven't called them. It's illegal to call them, isn't it? And I'm like, wait a minute. This is one of your best employees. And you're not even calling to say, hey, how are you doing? You know, just to check in on them. It's okay to do that, right? But I get it, because we are in a litigious world and people are afraid. So your question's a good one. People do need to know that, you know, it starts with conversations, but do know your rights. It's really important. Both the care recipient as well as the caregiver need to know what their rights are. And by the way, there's so many, unfortunately, it's complicated because Medicaid is run by the state. So every state has Medicaid, but there are now becoming more generous policies out there where a family member could be paid as a caregiver. And that way you can maybe leave a full-time job and take a part-time job and legally be paid as a family caregiver. But I encourage your listeners to look into the state. Every state is run differently in that respect.
That's so helpful, Zach. And thank you for plugging that one in there. I know we talked about that pre-show, so that shows Zach's ability to pull everything in a podcast format. Very good. So with that, I think the closing note, I could have this conversation for at least another 3+ hours, but I know we're running out of time. And we've got so much to be able to cover, so we'd love to have you guys back again, hopefully sometime soon. Last kind of tidbit from me is going to be this. When it comes to the resources currently available, both Selma and Zach have put together an incredible book. Take a look at it. Potentially, if you have the ability to get in front of your HR representatives at your work, then have them take a look at it too, to see what can be done to be able to help out with what's becoming a significant burden for all of society when it comes to working caregivers and the stresses we're putting on each other, and potentially the support even better that we can give each other. And so those are my pieces there. I'm going to hand it off, though, Donna, over to you, and then to Zach and Selma for any closing remarks.
Yeah, no, I just want to say thank you so much. There's so much more, like Kevin said, that we could be talking about, and there's so many avenues. But I think it's really important that working caregivers know that they are not alone, and that, you know, and one point that I think was really important too, Zach, that you had talked about is, in a group of us had talked about this too at work, and it's easier when it's a kid that you're caring for than an older adult, and it seems to be a little bit more acceptable, and et cetera. So I think that we do have more work to do in this area, of course, but I think the more we talk about it, like other things, we can make progress here. So thank you for bringing that in all of your work, both of you, Selma and Zach. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome. We thank you so much for having us on here. My 4 words is just a call to action to your listeners, that even if your parent is not in a position right now where they need care, think of it as they may, and learn how you can have those sensitive conversations. I always encourage people to have hypotheticals. For example, like if you're there for Thanksgiving, or no, what's coming up, Memorial Day or Mother's Day, let's say you're visiting, have a hypothetical conversation with your parent, like, hey, Joe next door, how are they doing? I'm just curious, what would they do if all of a sudden Joe couldn't live alone? Start doing, because look, there is dignity and independence that we need to respect with our parents, without a doubt. This is it's much smoother when we are doing it way earlier. So my encouragement for everybody, whether you read the book or not, doesn't matter, that hopefully you picked up a message from this podcast that, I need to be thinking about it. I need to maybe talk to somebody about it.
Yeah, and my message is just self-care. I can't say that enough, because it's like, just think of yourself on an airplane when they say, those masks come down out of the ceiling, put your mask on first and then assist your small child or your disabled parent. So you have to take care of yourself first. And the data points to the fact that when you don't do that, you actually can end up passing away before the person that you're caring for. Yes. So it's critical that you take self-care very seriously. Take your doctor's appointments as you're supposed to. Make sure you get everything. Stay checked up with your doctor.
Yeah. And self-care doesn't mean spas, right, Selma? It means take care of yourself. Yeah.
Yes.
If you want to make it to the spa, you go for it. If you got the time
or go to the lake. I love that story about the lake. I think I'm going to go with you.
Yeah. But otherwise, I think taking a breath, as you're pointing out there, Selma, and being able to just do a couple things to take care of yourself makes you just a better overall caregiver. For all those looking caregivers out there, thank you for everything that you're doing. You are appreciated by your family, by your communities, by your loved ones, by the four of us. And the work isn't going unnoticed in general. And we will see you guys hopefully next time on the Med List. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.